The film begins by showing a guy named Evan. He had just sent his friends to go on vacation. From here, we can assume that he was unhappy by his expression. He couldn't go on vacation with his friends since he had to meet his brother. In fact, he had lived in a different city apart from his brother, Peyton, for a few years. Of course, Evan had no pleasure on his vacation since his brother preferred living in nature. Peyton, on the other hand, is a person who rarely uses his cell phone and never uses it to communicate. When they got to the rocks they were headed for, Evan a bit more excited seeing other people besides him and his brother. Moreover, one of the women from the group seemed to have a crush on Evan, which she had just photographed. The blonde woman then invited Evan and his brother to join them. At first, Peyton wasn't interested in joining, but unlike Evan, he likes to socializing with others. Then, it turns out that Evan also has a crush on a woman in maroon, Zoe. From there, they began to introduce themselves, in which a woman in black named Tori, the woman in pink named Haley, a blonde woman, Camille, and Vanessa, a woman with glasses. Meanwhile, the guys included Sam with a black cap, a man in a black shirt, Max, Brian in a blue jacket, and a man in multicolored clothes, Nico. After Evan and Zoe's long conversation, the group of friends planned to return to the villa which was located far from that place. Zoe and Camille then invites Evan and Peyton to spend time and stay at their villa. Actually, Evan wanted to join the group, but he felt bad for his brother. As a result, the group had to leave Evan and Peyton, who headed another direction. However, not long after, Peyton soon realized that Evan was in a dilemma as a result of the situation. Evan clearly didn't want to waste this opportunity, and he preferred someone else over his brother. Long story short, the group of friends then had arrived at a villa. At first, there was nothing suspicious at all and everything went well. Until one moment, they all took turns to read horror stories, in which the stories had to be taken from a website. This is where the trouble starts when Evan reads a story called History, which doesn't sound like a story at all. After that, they all immediately stopped the activity and went back to the villa to have a party. Meanwhile, Zoe and Evan were alone together in warm water. On this occasion, Zoe shared that all of her 8 friends in the group were a couple, except her, who was still single. Therefore, Zoe felt lucky with the arrival of Evan, who seemed excited to accompany her. As time passes, the scene shows Evan, who just woke up from his sleep. Evan, who was satisfied with last night's party, immediately came out of the room, while greeting the blonde woman who was sitting in the living room. Not long after, Evan, who was wearing shoes, spotted a footprint leading to a warehouse. Inside the warehouse, he saw a mysterious image which seemed to be 5 people holding hands, which is not known what it meant. Then, he was approached by Zoe, who planned to spend time with him again today. Camille, on the other hand, had just woken up from her sleep and was rushing, since her friends were already prepared to go around. A few minutes after that, Camille then asked everyone to hurry up, especially Brian, who was still busy with his kitchen stuff. But as it turned out, Camille had no idea that Brian she was waiting for was already in the car. Of course, this strange incident made her so confused. Moreover, Evan also told them all to wait for a blonde woman, which he'd previously spotted in the living room. He then was told by all of them that there were no more blonde women, except Camille. After a long journey in the car, they all finally arrived at the rocky hill. They then began to separate, in which Evan and Zoe walking together with Nico, Haley, and Sam. In this scene, we can see that Tori had just climbed to catch up with them. But unexpectedly, Zoe simply jumped off a cliff and made her friends panic in an instant.
Done.
Luckily, Zoe didn't die but only suffered a leg injury. Strange things kept happening when Tori, who had just been spotted standing on the cliffs above, suddenly appeared beside Zoe.
No, I didn't.
Zoe also didn't even realize that she was about to fall free. She admitted that she didn't remember the incident until her legs was injured after hitting the ground. Later that night, they were gathered at the villa wondering about the previous incident. Plus, strange things keep happening that night. While Camille was on her way to grab a drink, she noticed Nico in the kitchen. However, when she returned to the living room, she was confused to see Nico in the living room talking with her friends. Despite the fact that they've had a number of strange things happen to them recently, but they're still certain it's all due to the effects of alcohol. But unlike Evan, He was so scared that it made Max intend to lock every door. Unfortunately, they were again surprised by the arrival of an unknown person.
Open it. Just open the door.
But as it turned out, the figure is Peyton, who had been waiting for his brother's return. Even so, they all immediately became suspicious of Peyton, since he had never been to this villa but could knew its location. However, their accusations were not true, because his brother had tracked Evan's location by relying on tools that worked with GPS. At this moment, Evan had actually been invited home by his brother, but he still wanted to be there to accompany Zoe. As a result, Peyton had to go back from the villa without his brother, who he had been worried about. Not long after Evan's brother left, they gathered to play guessing games.
Yes! Yeah! Never have I ever.
But when it was Sam's turn to answer, the electricity in the villa went out, and Sam strangely appeared from the kitchen. At this point, they all got goosebumps in an instant, since this proves that the figure who had previously played with them was not the real Sam. To make everyone feel safe, Evan, Max, and Sam walked throughout every room to turn on the lights that went out suddenly. The following day, Evan then woke up from his sleep, leaving Zoe alone in the room. This time he deliberately took Brian's laptop to find out some facts about the story he had previously read. Evan then discovered which in the previous night, he was not reading a horror story, but rather a spell that could summon a creature named Hischi. According to this source, Hischi is believed to be a creature who can change his form into anyone. The energy becomes even stronger when there are 5 individuals in a group, or when the number is doubled. After reading all the information, Evan planned to tell his friends that he no longer wanted to be there. However, he was surprised by the presence of Zoe, who encouraged Evan to stay with her. Moreover, Zoe also said that her leg was getting better, and Camille asked her to come along in Max's car. As a result, Evan got ready right away, and he joined Camille and Nico on a trip. When they arrived at the location, they all immediately got out of the car. However, Evan didn't see the appearance of Zoe, who said she would come along with Max's car. Plus, he was told that Zoe's condition was getting worse, requiring Brian and the others to look after her in the villa. Evan couldn't stop thinking after he heard that, and he soon realized there were 5 persons in the villa right now.
How many of them are there back at the house?
5?
As a result, he was panicked at the time and decided to return to the villa with Camille. Unfortunately, because they had traveled such a long distance from the resort, the 2 of them were only able to get at the villa at night. Moreover, the conditions inside the villa were not normal as usual, which had already turned into chaos. Evan and Camille didn't find their friends there, and they only found signs of a suicide inside the villa. Not long after that, Camille saw Zoe sitting around the campfire. This figure is obviously not the real Zoe, since we believe their 5 friends had committed suicide before they actually arrived there. At the same time, Max, Nico and Vanessa had just arrived at the villa. They had no idea that their arrival would be a new disaster, since the number of them is exactly 5 persons. And at that very moment, the demonic figure disguised as Zoe began counting down with her fingers. 1 bent finger will result in a suicide attempt by one of the peoples there. Fortunately, the action was failed, and they all run straight into the villa. When they realized their position was in threat, there was nothing else they could do but to block the door. Plus, the demon began to change forms alternately, which of course they no longer believed. Then, the lights in the villa suddenly went out again, and Evan quickly peeked through the window. The demon apparently wanted to show that he would still be able to bend his 4 fingers, which at the same time made Camille, Vanessa, Max, and Nico to commit suicide straight away. Well, as we can see here, they started to move abnormally and commit suicide in their own way. Even worse, Evan also can't escape because he's already trapped in a strange dimension. The strange dimension made him to be returned to the same place. In the end, he eventually gave up. At that very moment, he was merely seeking for Peyton's presence at the time, although he is well aware that his efforts would be in vain, since his brother is not someone who often uses cell phone. Evan had no choice but to leave a voice message for his brother, hoping that Peyton would hear it and know that Evan was no longer alive. A few days later, Peyton was on his way back to the villa. He was already worried about Evan's condition, since he hadn't seen Evan in a long time. When he arrived, the conditions inside the villa had returned to normal, and he had no reason to be suspicious. Unfortunately, just as he was going to listen to a voice message from his brother, the demon appeared and disguised himself as Evan.
Where is everybody? Just left.
Well, before the film ends, Peyton invites the fake Evan to meet his 4 friends. And the film ends here. Basically, I like the concept of the film since it seems to have been adapted from a creepypasta, despite the fact that the climax seems super rushed. Perhaps the sequel could continue the film into a new direction that focuses more on the creature and less on the teenagers.